Welcome back. The trial is underway for former Hedley frontman Jacob Hoggard on sexual assault and sexual interference charges. CP24's Jamie Goodfroy monitoring things in court and joins us live now with the latest. Jamie.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie. Right now, a preview of the prosecution's case is being presented to the court right now before witnesses are being called. Now, I want to bring in criminal defense lawyer Ari Goldkind to talk a little bit more about what's happening in court today. First off, Ari, thank you for joining us. There's a publication ban in this particular trial. We cannot identify the names of the complainants and a lot of the witnesses. Talk a little bit about why that publication is in place and why it's important moving forward in this trial.
So there's usually two or more kinds of publication bans in a jury trial. One is that the evidence that was taken at a preliminary inquiry some time ago can't come forward because you don't want the jury to be poisoned. You don't want people to prejudge it. The question here in a sex assault trial is that the names of the alleged victims, there's two in this case, they will be protected throughout that process. And in very simple terms, that was a decision made long time ago to encourage potential or alleged victims to come forward. Given the sensitive nature of sexual assault allegations, the idea is that you protect the name of the complainants so that you don't deter anybody else from coming forward, given historically the number of people who would not come forward in sexual assault criminal matters because they were worried about the fallout or societal response to them coming forward. So that's essentially what we're talking about here.
The prosecution right now was just wrapping up their presentation of an overview of this particular case. I'm not going to get into specifics, but I can tell you and our viewers the nature of what was just presented was extremely graphic of the allegations against Mr. Hoggard and what he allegedly did to these two victims. And the judge specifically said that the opening is an outline of the evidence, that everything that is being presented is anticipated evidence. I was wondering if you can kind of break down a little bit more about the importance of this particular opening and how it could potentially affect the decision of these jurors.
Well, an opening is actually quite important. And from a criminal defense lawyer point of view, it's something that I pay extraordinarily close attention to. Here's some reasons why. A Crown in their opening statement doesn't overpromise and overdeliver. You almost want to dial it back to the things that you know your witnesses will be able to show to a jury. Because as a defense lawyer, if I hear something in an opening statement that I know the Crown didn't show throughout the trial, or failed to show, or the evidence went miserably for them, I'm going to pick at that to the jury in my closing statement and say, remember when the Crown promised you X, Y, and Z, and they didn't deliver to you X and Y? That's very powerful for a defense counsel at the end. So the Crown in their opening just now, and you're right, we won't get into the details, but there are some really brutal, violent allegations here that Mr. Hoggard will have to defend against. The Crown basically made 2 points that jumped out to me. One, the brutality and violence of the allegations, assuming these things are non-consensual at their core. And two, they're going to introduce friends of the complainants that the complainants went to right after these things in a very distraught, very affected way. That can have a powerful effect on a jury. And the third part that we'll talk about as this case goes on is the statement Mr. Hoggard put out before his arrest on anti-social media, as I call it, and throughout Canada. And that statement, in my view, could potentially come back to bite Mr. Hoggard in his posterior as this trial goes, because I think the jury will probably hear it.
And the onus is on the Crown to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but at the same time, the defense has a responsibility to shoot down many of these allegations and trying to prove his innocence. How difficult, how will this defense be for Mr. Hoggard, and how big of an uphill battle is approaching him right now?
These kinds of allegations are always an uphill battle for an accused man to defend against. Remember, there's probably very little forensic evidence here that's not on video camera. However, we don't know what Mr. Hoggard's defense is. There's probably going to be a treasure trove of text messages and other things. Remember, he was in these communications with at least one of the women for a very long period of time. They were fans of his. We don't know what was discussed or agreed to in advance. He's essentially alluded to to that in the last few years. Remember, this case goes back a number of years, delayed heavily because of COVID, including the lack of juries in Ontario. So it's very easy to say how hard these cases are to defend. They're very ugly. Juries become uncomfortable, particularly at the language the Crown introduced this morning of the kind of sexual activity we're talking about. But in fairness, Mr. Hoggard to this day, and he's not supposed to until this week starts, has not revealed his defense in a deep way. There may be some communications and other things Mr. Hoggard puts forward. And at the end of the day, as these trials go, we don't know what the evidence is that Mr. Hoggard will marshal, but clearly he wanted his day in court, and that has started just a few minutes ago.
And CP24 is going to have updates on this trial throughout the rest of the day. Ari Goldkind, we always appreciate your time and perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.